Hey, what's up guys, Chris here, back into No Man's Sky with a brand new video, and today I actually want to start with a brand new playthrough. I haven't done this since at least 2017, which is exactly how old my current gameplay, the one that you normally see here on this channel, is at this point, and I just wanted to start things fresh as well as kinda showcasing some of the early tips and tricks that you should probably use if you also want to have an optimized gameplay. This is something that I'm always doing, and especially nowadays after hundreds, maybe even thousands of hours of gameplay, when I just want to get things done as fast as possible. I'm pretty sure that a lot of you saw other videos out there with people having perfect starts in No Man's Sky. Well, today we are going to go over my perfect start in No Man's Sky, and yes, we are also going to go over some really awesome and neat tips and early tricks that you can apply to your gameplay as well, especially now since we're heading into 2020. So hit that like button if you enjoyed this, and let's actually begin our journey right here. Of course, one of the first things that I'm doing as soon as I have control over my character is to look for an area with a lot of resources clamped together. In this case, a lot of trees, a lot of rocks, and also a lot of dihydrogen crystals, which I was lucky enough to have quite a few of in the beginning areas. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking advantage of my overheat mechanic of the multi-tool, which basically lets me collect resources 2 times faster than usual as long as I'm hovering in the red over there. So in the 95 percentile to the 99, just don't let your multi-tool overheat, otherwise you might be losing precious seconds. But I'm doing this, I'm collecting all of these, aiming for at least 500 of each of the materials with the exception of the dihydrogen, and then quickly proceeding to repair my multi-tool scanners as soon as possible. You need the carbon nanotubes and the ferrite dust for the multi-tool in the first place. But once that is done and it's all completed, you can finally start scanning, and here is where the game brings you into the next section. Of course, it finally unlocks on your screen where you can head towards your crashed ship, but more important, it's also going to reveal sodium and other elements. In this case, sodium and oxygen are very important early on, both for surviving as well as for some of the recipes early on. But I was lucky enough in this case to find at least a few dozen plants over here, sodium-rich plants, that normally doesn't really happen for me. So I'm immediately taking on the opportunity. I'm also lucky enough to find one of these deuterium plants early on, and you're going to want to make use of these as often as possible because this gives you infinite jetpack for about 10 seconds. So I'm immediately using that, which makes me go in very fast to my ship, which is quite far away. But I was talking about oxygen. There's always going to be about 4 or 5 plants right next to the crashed ship, especially since I would be using it later on, both for regenerating my health as well as for crafting the refiner. But this brings me to the distress beacon. I'm activating it, and from this point on it just tells me to climb into my ship. But what I'm doing instead is I'm going towards these containers over here, and I suggest, this is like basically the next tip on the list, I suggest getting the rusted metal out of it. It's absolutely important to get this because it breaks down into ferrite dust, and the 75 or 76 that I got here can break into about 150. But of course that is done. I'm climbing into my ship, and here is where it basically indicates that it needs repairing, and because we collected at least a few hundred of each of these resources, we have more than enough to simply go ahead and do the repairing right now. I'm creating those metal platings, I'm creating those dihydrogen jellies, which are really useful, and the next parts are about collecting the hermetic seal, which you cannot craft in the early stages. The game gives you coordinates to where to find it, and also later on with the magnetized ferrite you get that from refining actual ferrite dust. I'm also going on back to the distress signal, I'm getting the map, activating it, and this finally shows me exactly where I need to head towards for the hermetic seal. So what I'm doing is I'm basically traveling over there, making use of all of the tips and tricks that I just showed you, collecting a few more resources along the way since I also found a few, and I actually get there in no time because I'm getting all of these blue plants that give me infinite jetpack. But yeah, once I get there I just take it back, and I'm heading back towards my ship that is awaiting its repairs. But nothing else is on the way. If you didn't get all of that sodium I was talking about or oxygen, just collect some of these on these journeys that you're doing between the ship and the stuff that you need to collect, and you should have more than enough to last you in the early stages. But once I do reach back to the ship, I'm able to fully repair the pulse engine because of the hermetic seal, and now all I need to do is to take care of the launch thrusters, but these do require pure ferrite, about 50 of these, and this is also when the game unlocks the portable refiner for you. And here is where the next couple of tips and tricks are going to come into play. First of all, I was talking about the rusted metal earlier, and this is where it all becomes very useful. As you can see, 76 rusted metal transforms or breaks down into 152 ferrite dust. From here on, I'm climbing back into my ship, and what I'm doing is I'm breaking down the rocket launcher. You don't actually need it, the attack is pretty weak, it doesn't follow enemies, so the best thing to do in the early game is to simply dismantle it and get that 100 copper from it. Most important of them all is the copper, because you can turn this into chromatic metal, and eventually you are going to reach a mission that requires about 30 chromatic metal to build the base computer. Also, because my rusted metal is still processing down, I'm also collecting a few more resources over here, especially the carbon that I need quite a bit of. Eventually, of course, it all breaks down and I can finally turn it into the pure ferrite, which is exactly what I do with the whole batch. I will need the pure ferrite both for the launch thrusters as well as later on for something else. In the meantime, as always, I'm using the downtime in order to collect as many resources as possible and paying special attention to those green boxes I was talking about earlier. But eventually the entire ship is repaired and we can finally leave the planet, and this only took like a few minutes to reach this point, which would otherwise take quite a bit longer if you were to go with a more regular route, not planning ahead and just wasting time. That is not something that I want to do on my starter planet, especially since generally speaking it isn't that great. But eventually we get everything done and move into space, and here's a couple of things that you can do. You can start mining these asteroids and they can drop some gold ingots, and you can further turn these gold ingots into regular gold and sell it for quite a nice profit at the space station, about a few 100,000 units in the beginning of the game, which can definitely be very useful. But I am not wasting too much time here. I'm just collecting a few of these for the tritium so that I can power my engines, and I'm immediately heading towards the next planet. The reason for that is because I don't want to waste any time on these subpar money-making methods, because I am actually searching for a much better one that involves storm crystals in just a little bit. So in order to plan ahead better, what I'm doing here is I'm scanning all of the planets to see what resources they have, specifically because I'm looking for ones indicating anything such as, for example, activated copper or anything else. The reason for that is because planets with activated minerals in general have higher chances to also feature extreme storms, and what this also means is that there's a high chance to have storm crystals spawn on them. Unfortunately, I am unable to find any of those planets. There's just 3 of them, so what I'm doing is I'm just progressing a little bit more into the story, and this brings me to the base computer I was talking about. Because we collected all of those resources early on, we now have everything we need in order to build a base computer. Of course, the game also gives me the terrain manipulator, but because I already have that copper I was talking about, I don't need to actually scout ahead for a copper deposit. I can just use the resource that I already had from scrapping that rocket launcher. What I am doing instead is that in the time my refiner is transforming that copper into chromatic metal, I am looking for buried technology modules for 2 reasons. First of all, because, well, you can unlock some really useful tech really soon after this, especially the base teleporter, and second of all, because this is a very good early on money making method. You can get anywhere between 1 and 5 buried technologies, which sell for at least a few 100,000 each on the market, so it is definitely a very good method of actually making some money, grabbing resources along the way, again paying attention to the damaged containers, the green ones. You don't need to take too many of these, which is why I went back to my ship where my chromatic metals should now be pretty much done. From here on, I'm building the base computer, claiming a base, and just following all of the prompts up until I get the chance to get the base computer archives. But yeah, once that is done, the mission points me towards the space station, the first time I actually have to land on it. But earlier I did realize there was a planet with ancient bones, so what I'm planning here is to shoot 2 birds with 1 stone by simply also collecting these bones on my way towards the space station. And this is exactly what happens. I'm going in, collecting all of these, farming for about 10 minutes for these bones, collecting about 2 million worth of them, and then I am finally heading towards the space station where I also end up selling them. And this is a nice little early profit over here that I'm able to make. Almost 2 million within a few minutes of already starting the game, so I can already start affording some really important stuff. That is why I'm going ahead and later on going to be purchasing some of the materials and the elements that are going to be needed for the rest of the game. I'm also paying close attention to these devices over here for the navigation data inside of them, because I can exchange these at the cartographer NPC for maps with distress signals. So I can go ahead and scan for 2 very important distress signals that you can actually search for early on, which are the abandoned building for the alien eggs and also for the crashed ships for some little extra profit and some other materials that you can get off it. But mainly it's those abandoned buildings which are super useful for the alien eggs. You can both sell those eggs as well as transform them into nanites. Another thing that I'm doing is that I'm paying close attention to what types of upgrade modules the NPCs on the space station spawn. To be more specific, the ones for the backpack and the other one for the multi-tool, because there's 2 types of upgrades that I'm looking right now. The one is for the scanner for the multi-tool so that I can make a ton more money, and the other one is for the movement module for my backpack so that I can use my jetpacks way better, move faster and all that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, these space stations don't really have all of the stuff that I need. Other than that, what I'm doing here is to redeem your bonus content Horizon Omega ship. Unfortunately, you don't get an extra ship, you can only exchange it, but it is useful for the fact that the hyperdrive that already comes pre-installed, as well as 1 charge in it that will let you jump 1 time through another system. But before moving on and going back to my base, the one last thing that I'm doing is purchasing from the space station a few more materials that I actually need. First of all, I'm getting all of the sodium I can get as well as the oxygen, and you're going to want to buy this with your initial sum of money because we are going to be hunting for storm crystals and these are going to keep us alive. Sodium is going to be for the shields and oxygen for your health, so definitely go ahead and get this. From here on, I'm following the story all the way to the point that it brings me to this crashed freighter, and unfortunately I was pretty unlucky here that the freighter required cobalt in order to repair its cargo, but otherwise I do suggest digging up all of these cargo pods and checking what is inside, because they can give you some really valuable resources. They can even give you warp cells or like 50,000 units, which can be very useful early on. But yeah, going at the terminal near the crash freighter will teach you the blueprint for the hyperdrive, build it, and if you had the materials that you collected at the start like I did, you would be able to do that right now. Otherwise, you can just move on to the next part of the mission, which is tracing antimatter, and this is when you will reach your first abandoned building. So pay close attention to this one because this is going to be really useful early on. It's a free abandoned building, so what I suggest doing before maybe jumping in is to just dig yourself a hole and then also dig up towards the larval cores so that they can just safely fall into your arms. You can collect them. Otherwise, you can also build some walls, but that requires a base, so I don't recommend that. Or you can go inside and wait until the swarm despawns, which happens after about 1 minute of not engaging with them. But in this case, I'm just digging underground, which is really painful because it's really shallow and there's a lot of water going on. But otherwise, I am able to collect these about 15 of these alien eggs, which would turn into about 1,000 nanites. Now, normally you can go ahead and sell these for quite a big profit, about 350,000 for a full stack of 5, but I actually recommend not wasting any of these on the market and actually turn them into nanites. It's going to be way more important to turn them into nanites since you can't come across nanites early on too easily. From this point on, the mission is going to point you towards a different solar system. This is the first time you can use your warp drive, but what I suggest here is to not follow what the game tells you to do, but rather search for systems with a ton of planets. What I did in this case is I exclusively spent the next half an hour hunting from one system to another with at least 4 or 5 planets in them to see which one of them has those extreme storms for the storm crystals. I reached this system over here with one of the planets, a high energy planet called Heli. So this was actually quite a fitting name, especially since since this was a high energy planet, it had some pretty severe storms, but more important of them all, it also had activated copper, which indicated me that there was a high chance for those superheated storms to happen, and it also had the salvageable scrap, so two birds with one stone, which meant that I could make millions in just a very short amount of time. I can both collect the salvageable scrap when there's no storm on the planet, and then collect the actual storm crystals when the storm is actually happening. And that is exactly what I did. I went ahead, I started taking those salvageable scraps, and when the storm came around, I started going for the storm crystals. And this is how I made about 10 million really easily. Again, we saved a lot of time by collecting all of the resources in bulk, crafting them in bulk. Otherwise, I would have needed about 3 hours to achieve all of this if I just went in the regular route. But this is basically when I end up the first part of the playthrough. I think I was able at one point to find one maximum rank scanner for my multi-tool, and yeah, these are just some of the early tips and tricks that you can do in order to maximize your gameplay, in order to make the most out of it, get as much as possible, and immediately get that money flow so that you can afford the stuff that is going to help you even more in the later game. I do have a second playthrough where I'm actually transforming that 10 to 15 million that I made in the first hour into about 60 or 70 within the next hour. So I'm doing a lot of optimizations in my playthrough, especially in this one, that I want to quickly bring up to speed so that I can do some more filming in it. But yeah, let me know down below if you want me to continue the series of start tips and tricks, this perfect start thing that I'm trying to do. Otherwise, let me know if you have any other suggestions. In the meantime, as always, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching, and peace.